Eliza Kim. We're joined by Ms. Leslie Gleim and Ms. Jordan Guillory from Mid-Pacific Institute today. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And could you tell us a little bit about what you do, what your roles are at Mid-Pacific?
Sure. I'm the Petagogista, and at my role, I'm over the project work. I work with the teachers on their professional development and also with the parents and the children in the classroom.
And I'm Jordan Guillory. I'm a tellerista for preschool and for kindergarten. And I actually help support Leslie and the teachers within the project work with the arts and using the different languages to express themselves. Yep.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Great. Well, several years ago, I had an opportunity to have breakfast with Dr. Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I was intrigued by the fact that he had 9 children and many, many grandchildren. So I asked him, what was that one thing he did with his children that made a huge impact, the biggest impact on the success of their career or their lives? And he said that every night my wife sat down with my children, each one of them, and had them teach her what they had learned at school that day. And I remember, this was so it made a really huge impression on me, and I decided to make a mental note to do the same thing for my children. Well, this is easier said than done, because you ask any preschool child and they'll say, well, if you ask them, what did you learn today? They'll do a shrug and go, I don't know. So it makes it easy for us to believe as parents that they may have not learned anything, because you can't get any answers from them.
Yes.
So when you ask them to teach you something, then this may not work. But I found that there is something very unique in Mid-Pacific that we do at preschool that you do with children called the daily plan. And this could be the closest thing to really learning, having you teach them, having them teach you what they have learned. So these are the important milestone that lay conceptual foundation for literacy. So can you explain to us what the daily plans are and what are the children instructed to do?
Sure. So it is very unique to Mid-Pacific itself and the preschool because the plans began with a child about in 2007, so 7 years ago. And she came to a group meeting wanting to take notes. And as a teacher, we could have said, oh, put the clipboards away. We're at the meeting. You need to sit and pay attention. But instead, we said, oh, well, take the notes for what's happening today. So she did. And we were impressed that in her marks, she was able to tell us exactly what was going to happen. The next day, many children wanted to do the same thing. So we began to wonder what was powerful about that to them taking their notes at the meeting. And through a long process of research, looking at marks, looking at the type of materials that we offer, we come to know what we call the daily plans. And it's not so much about what are they instructed to do, but rather it's how we scaffold them in their learning through literacy and symbols.
Great. So, I'm curious about when you ask a child or children to represent their thoughts, how do you teach them the concepts of symbol or a language?
So I think it begins with that word mark, and we'll talk a little more about what they're putting on the page, because through research we know that when children sit down to draw, even though they're very young, those marks, those scribbles, as some may call it, have meaning to them. So for us, we take where they are, if it's a scribble or whatever mark, and we help them through this process, through questions and looking at the mark and the intentionality of the marks that's on the page.
Great.
Yeah, I think within the mark is them beginning to understand that the mark is has a meaning to it, that it represents something. So it's a beginning, like Leslie said, the beginning of the symbols and literacy is that they're connected, and that makes sense to them.
Okay, great, great. So what's I often hear this word mark, but some of the viewers may not be clear, what marks are. So could you tell us what that means? What does mark mean, and marks mean, and what is the term? Why is the term used in the daily plan?
So when children began to put their scribbles, rather than saying a scribble or giving it a name, we do give it a name of mark because it's very neutral. It's a name that they may not comprehend. And so through the neutralness of it, they help them to come to understand that there's meaning there, and that in our looking at the marks, they are developing to their own way of interpreting the marks for us versus us interpreting them to them. So it leaves it a more openness for them, rather than how often we see a child draw something and you'll say, oh, you've made a cat, da da da. We've already in our minds judged it and said it's that. So in the child's mind, if it doesn't look like what they think we're wanting, then it may lower their self-esteem, and they're wanting them to do it more towards the parent than about themselves. So we want it to become more independent and more intrinsic on their own.
But I do remember when one of the preschools, and it was pre-preschool, my son had gone to, they were going through flashcards, and one of the flashcards showed a picture of an arrow. And you're talking about 2 years old and maybe 2.5. And the teacher said, okay, so what is this? And the flashcard's literally this little. And everybody's looking at it, and my son goes, feather. And to me, that's exactly what it looked like. I mean, it could look like feather. But she goes, no, it's an arrow. And I remember I had to go up to the teacher and actually talk to her about it, because I didn't feel like, what she thought was the correct thing may not, it does not have to be, the same thing, what he thinks is the right thing either.
Within that, really, then that sets the child up with repeated experiences like that for looking at the teacher like, what do you want me to say? To wanting to please them rather than it being about their own idea.
Or not be able to say anything because they may be wrong. So that was a really, I do remember that was very important for me, that he was not judged for what she felt was the right thing. But, well, let's look at a plan a child had done. And this example is going to show the viewers what the mark looks like. So can you explain to us, what this drawing is about?
Sure. So when you look at the drawing, if you look towards the left, you'll see that there's this, looks like things stacked upon each other. And this is where he created his plans. We had 4 appointments for the day. And as he's explaining them to us, he gets to the end, and I found it intriguing how he had put all his appointments inside these boxes. And when I had asked him, I said, boy, this is very clever that you've done this way. He didn't bother to say anything more about that. However, when I asked him about the mark on the very top, he said, oh, well, this is a building, and this is the horn on top of the building. And I realized that he made the floors of the building, and he inserted each plan inside of that. And then if you look on the right-hand side, you'll notice that it looks like a person. Well, so when I asked him more about that, he says, well, that's me getting on the elevator.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So again, I could have interpreted, oh, you have these in these boxes, and it would have shut him down. But rather, I kept talking about the marks. And when I got to the one mark that I didn't know about, and I asked him about the top mark, it triggered his memory that, oh, this is a building, and this is what it was there. So again, he came to this conclusion and telling us about it on his own. It empowered him to open up more about what he had drawn, rather than me judging him and then him just agreeing to what I had said.
Great, great. Well, initially, it starts with what appears to be a meaningless scribbles, and but over time, these scribbles or the marks become something of an elaborate drawings. So how do the plans impact their thinking, problem-solving skills, and academics?
So instead of saying academics, let's think about learning dispositions. So we're giving them the disposition to think, to have their voice, to speak up, to advocate what they are thinking about to adults, which sometimes that is very intimidating to children. But some of the longer list would be that we're looking at them speaking peer-to-peer, because the plans are often done as a group together. So they can sit at the table and work together and scaffold each other, which I think is powerful than learning from each other. It also, we know that in remembering the appointments for the day, which we'll discuss more how that works, that they have to remember the 4 appointments. And in order to remember that, that's using short-term memory, which is part of reading. So again, we're laying the solid foundation for that literacy and reading later on. And again, making their thinking visible, many things, listening to and following directions. So we think of those kind of lists. You know, it's very long. It can be endless of what the plans do.
And those 4 appointments are all different every day?
Yes, it depends. And sometimes as the children become more acclimated to it, we begin making the 5 to 6 to 8. It just depends on, the community that we have that year and how we would like for this to unfold. So in that, when they leave 4 and they start looking for 5, they have to figure out how to divide their paper. How do they want to put the 5 plans on there so there's some math skills coming forward through the whole thing. So it's a really, I think, metacognitive thinking that's happening as they begin to put their plans for the day.
And with the project work also, tossing in the theory drawings, so ideas that they might have, about how do you share a memory? What would that look like? So that could be part of the plan that day, so we have that as well. And and working off and collaborating with each other, because if they forget one, they'll ask a friend rather than a teacher. So depending on each other as well,
Right. And one of the things that were really fascinating to me were that they were able to portray texture and sounds and just different things that were not tangible.
Right.
That's something that, as an adult, I'm not sure if I can actually describe what those mean. They're able to do so.
And I think that's where the power of calling it a mark comes in, because it's not, it can be defined in many ways.
Right.
Whereas, if you say it's this, or then you put them into a box.
Yeah.
But in understanding that every mark has a meaning that's on there, and it's very intentional, it can be read. And that's another key piece to this, is how is it read by the viewer, by the teacher when they come to it. That, I think, that empowers them in many ways. And we see it going across into the studio and their work in the classroom as well.
Because really it's about making their marks and their, as you've seen as a child grows, more readable. Because just like an artist expressing an idea, the more they grow, the more they understand, like, I have to make this so someone else can read it. Then, there's all that additional, those little adjectives, those little lines that they add to the mark, the symbol that they're making.
So they have to think about how other people may perceive this.
Right. A lot of critical thinking, goes into that.
That's very powerful. Well, let's look at an example of how these plans come, starts from the beginning, and a year later what happens to it. So let's start with the first video, and you'll be able to see, we're going to demonstrate the progression. And I want the viewers to notice not only the drawings this child makes, but also his body, the difference in his body language and his fine motor skills from one video to the next. Okay.
This is a teacher's meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're eating food?
Yeah.
Where's the teacher?
Teacher's right there. And they're opening the door.
Oh, okay. Can you put the eyes on the teachers? On the teachers. If this is the teacher, I need to have eyes on the teacher. Awesome. So is there only one teacher meeting, or is there 2? Okay. Go ahead, another teacher. And that's her face. Where's her mouth?
I don't know.
Are they happy to go to the meetings?
They're sad.
Oh, they are. I've heard that before.
So this portrays something that happened less than a year ago, and then what we'll do is we'll look at the video from a year later and see what happens with the transformation that the same child makes.
You got one teacher they're not meeting, they're just standing there, and you have to have a bunch of teachers in order to have them. No, she's not. You know teachers that sleep?
Another sleeping teacher.
You think we just go to meetings to sleep? Oh, that's a good idea.
It's not eyeball.
Where's her mouth? She doesn't look like she's talking. If you go to a meeting, do you talk or not?
No.
No? You just stand there and look at each other? So here's teachers meeting.
Okay, so what you have just witnessed is not only the progression and transformation, but also a critical process called the check-in process. And what is it exactly that you do during this check-in process?
So this, we feel, is probably the most critical time because it's one-on-one with the teacher. Most of the time, you're seeing on this particularly, these videos was taken kind of isolated from the classroom just because we were recording them for the parents. Normally it happens within the classroom. So they will come to the teacher, and at that point, it's when the teacher is working with the child to help them understand the intentions of the mark and making the mark revisitable and readable. So when they come to us, you notice that I made some suggestions to them. Now, the child, as they become very comfortable, they either accept the teacher's ideas or they'll not, and they go on and do something completely different, which is what we would love to see. We love to see that happening because that means that they are very confident that, thank you for your suggestion, but here's what I think will make it better and make it readable. And often it does. And again, they're looking at the meaning of that mark, how it's very critical to how the teacher is reading it.
Oh yeah, it goes with the culture of our classroom too, because the children grow up, within the classroom, and they understand that this is the game, this is us pushing each other's thinking, and you can see the relationship. It's really lovely between the teacher and the child as well,
And yes, I'm glad you brought that up because if you notice that he's very confident and almost we get into this teasing thing. He's teasing me about the teacher's going to sleep, and I tease him back like the teachers really don't. So it's not really. I think they don't see us as a teacher versus child. It's two learners together trying to understand what the meaning of this mark is, and it's about this relationship that we have as we know them really well.
So to me, this is what Mrs. Covey was trying to do with her children, to have them teach her, what they had learned at school, but in a modified Reggio version.
Yes.
And I really like it because this is where our children are going, and with the way the children are now, this decade, they're different than 40 years ago and 50 years ago, and I think this will definitely accommodate to them better, to enable them to and empower them to become the person they want to be.
Because they'll push themselves, and they're co-constructing really with the teacher too. So there's that relationship of the pushing, the thinking,
Right.
So it's probably an added thing to what she would do is really of them constructing together the meaning, right?
Exactly.
And rethinking and revisiting it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's very true. So it's actually made that whole process even more with a deeper meaning and deeper understanding of the children. Well, how do the plans lead to literacy without teaching the alphabets? Because that's one of the things, you don't have ABCDs on the wall, and it sounds almost impossible that they will learn to read and write when you don't teach them, what seems to be the foundation in learning a language.
So in our studies, we noticed that many of the Scandinavians, particularly Finland, who has highly regarded for the educational system, reading doesn't happen until first, second grade. So looking at what research is telling us, that in not pushing down the ABCs, but rather giving them time to do something that is very developmentally appropriate, which is their drawing and their ideas. We're giving them time to foster in their minds this notion how symbols work, how marks become very intentional. I guess I've said that many times, but I think it's really a key to all of this, and that it makes them even more prepared and ready for when formalized alphabets come, because they're reading the letters as marks on there, that each marks are connected to make this is how we make an A, and it starts making sense to them. They've had that time to think about symbols and how words may work. For example, they could write the word cat, or we could write the word snack on there. However, it doesn't convey their meanings. Whereas if they do the drawing themselves, it could be the cat could be a striped cat one day, and the next day it could have long hair. Again, it's up to allowing them that freedom to explore and to ingrain in their minds what a symbol might look and work like.
Yeah, and symbols are so much more, I think, creative and imaginative than the letters themselves. And it is a precursor, because you have that where you can, like Leslie was saying, where you can add your perspective and your imagination to drawing a symbol, where a word you cannot. It's just spelled one way, depending on which language you're in, right?
Right, exactly. Exactly. Well, it seems to make a lot of sense in theory, but realistically it doesn't seem like it would be possible. But it was not until I saw it with my own eyes that I actually believed that this does work. Okay. Well, how do the plans support the development of communication?
So I think this is where another beauty of the plans is that they are universal, in that a drawing can be read by any of us in any language. So in a multicultural classroom, which we have, it allows them to make their own vocabulary within the classroom, and that the symbols that anybody could read, no matter if English is your second language, you can now communicate and understand what you want to convey to others. And I think that's a powerful way to understand how to communicate. And it's not only how do I communicate with my friends, but also with the adults in the classroom too. So I think it's very, lifts them cognitively and emotionally for that, and getting them ready for reading and writing.
Well, this is sort of how we could use to communicate back in the old days,
Yes.
when, before the language actually developed.
Because early on, young children, that's not, verbal is not really, that's why the languages of materials and drawing and all that are so important, because they do have it. So being able to express themselves and that in that way is so important.
Right, right. And all these linear thinking, academics things will come later too, and they are going to get those anyhow.
Right.
So I think this lays a very important foundation, and it's a critical, for this age.
Right.
Well, like there's one thing that I want to talk about, which is in the process of making self-assessments. Self-assessments meaning, which requires intrinsic thinking of editing and adding to their marks, and symbols that are readable by a reader. Well, something very profound happens that goes beyond the academics or beyond just what you see on the paper. Well, could you explain what that is?
So as the children grow older into this process, some of the ones like who the second check-in that we saw of Ethan's, he's beginning to self-edit. So when he sits down, he'll look at something and he knows that, oh, this really, I bet that the teacher can't really understand this. I'm going to add this to this mark. So that's a form of, I think, self-assessment, because they know, they begin to understand that what is making meaning to somebody else. And in the end, it's really them thinking about the other, about it. So there's this process called decentering of ourselves, where we go from ourselves to the other person that's there. And I think it often happens around 5, 6 probably, but in the planning process, we were able to take it down to 3 and 4-year-olds, that they begin to understand that empathy of what other could be thinking. And I think that's powerful.
And it's like a precursor too, with a child doing a math problem when they're older, or writing a paper, for instance. It's that self-editing. So they're building that foundation right there, so that when they're older and they're doing those things, they can say, oh yeah, I'm going to edit this, or I'm going to make it more readable, because that's such
Right.
a hugely important thing with any academic.
Right.
Is can the reader, did the viewer, did my teacher understand, did my fellow students understand what I'm trying to say, right?
Exactly, and also it really increases the skills of observation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they
Yes,
need to
for
be able
sure.
to be aware of their surroundings
Mhm.
and what they have on their paper in order to really get this point across
Mhm.
to the readers.
Yes.
And I think that advocacy of self, that you don't always hear, because generally when they come into the classroom, it's give me the answers versus give me your ideas and what are you thinking. So I think it's really powerful.
Well, this also helps them to impact their decision-making skills and, kind of promoting and allowing them to be independent through making choices. Well, I really thank you so much, Ms. Leslie and Ms. Jordan, for joining us today. And please come back again. We love
Thank you.
having you here. Well, I'm Dr. Eliza Kim, and this is Everyday Wellness. Aloha until next time.